Lane, welcome, man.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so
Thanks
much
for
for
having me on.
thank you so much for showing up. When I invited you, you had a request of me that you and Kent Dodds should be back to back, and I obliged. I had
Perfect.
Kent last week. I'm having you this week, and I'm super excited for the conversation. And I'm excited for this conversation for a couple of reasons. First of all, because we already had a preview of that when I first met you. So we had breakfast together talking about religion and the Roman Empire, if you remember.
Oh, I
Uh,
remember.
yeah. And that was before the Roman Empire became a thing.
Yeah.
So just that's when, back when I still thought that I was the only weirdo that thought about the Roman Empire every single day of my life. And also because I'm hosting this podcast where I want to talk to religious people, believers in this field where if you claim you believe something, you have people like my former self saying, "Oh, you're stupid. You're an idiot. How can you believe any of those fantasies?" So I'm getting people like Kent. I'm getting people. The Primogen is coming as well. But you are the odd one off. You are from the other side. You've done the opposite thing. So you are. So I would love to for us to start by you just telling us your story, right from the early beginnings, I guess, in Utah to today.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I wanted me and Kent to be back to back just because I thought it would be more interesting.
Yeah.
Uh, Obviously, we both have a Mormon backgrounds. Kent is
Hmm.
still LDS, and I'm not. So yeah, I guess I'll just start at the beginning. So I grew up in a little town called St. George, Utah, and I actually don't know what the population is. It's in southern Utah. It's by density much more LDS than the Salt Lake area. So
Hmm.
it's like very very LDS. And that's usually how it goes in Utah. Like the smaller towns tends to have a higher concentration um, of church going folks than actually Salt Lake itself, which is sometimes counterintuitive.
I think this is probably true for anything. Like the usually the bigger towns, you get more secular people, much
Yeah.
more cosmopolitan, and then on the smaller towns.
Yeah, exactly. I'm looking up the population now. If this number means anyone to anything, it looks like today it's 100,000 people. But when I moved there in the late 90s, it was like 40,000 people. So it's grown a
Okay.
lot. Um, and I grew up LDS, like very straightforward Mormon upbringing, which I'm sure to a lot of people that may not mean anything, like what exactly that entails. But the basics are pretty simple. Like Mormonism is a fairly these days Mormonism is a fairly mainstream. There's not too much too different um, between Mormons and kind of mainstream Christianity, in my view. I think it used to be quite a bit different, especially back in like the polygamy days.
Mhm.
Um, but like went to church for 3 hours once a week, had youth groups. I did serve an LDS mission. That was definitely the biggest thing. Was I spent 2 years in Paraguay.
Where was it? Paraguay? I was, yeah.
Paraguay, yeah, learned Spanish, um, and I was faithful the whole time. Like I never really had any issues with the church or with religion as a teenager, or on my mission. It wasn't until a couple of years after that I got home when I started looking into some things, and we can get into that. But eventually left the church when I was 24. So now it's
Yes.
been 5 years.
Awesome. And for the math-oriented people in the audience, Lane just told us his age, right? So
Yes.
or Lane, you're super young, man. You're a baby. I'm 41, so
Yeah, there's
you're
still
rocking.
time. There's still time to
Yeah,
reconvert. And
there- that's not my goal. That's not my goal here. This is my goal is just really for us to have the conversation. So you grew up in Utah, and in big family as well, I presume, because Kent was saying that like the small Mormon families will have 3 kids, like tiny.
yeah.
What are those guys doing?
So my dad comes from a family of 11. Um,
Okay.
Him and my mother were both raised in Vegas, which might surprise a lot of people. Las Vegas is actually there's actually a pretty high concentration of Mormons living in Las Vegas.
Hmm.
So both sides of the family are from there. St. George is only about an hour and a half away from Vegas. So I spent a lot of time down in Las Vegas growing up. But so dad came from a huge family, and then I'm the second of four brothers.
Four brothers. Yeah. Are you the only one in your family that left the faith?
I left first, by a very small margin. My older brother left very shortly after. Like if you like, squint your eyes and back up, it would look at like maybe about the exact same time. And then my two younger brothers, to the best of my knowledge, are still faithful, believing members, and then as well as the rest of my family. So it's really just me and my older brother.
What led you to do this? Because again, something must have happened, right? Just that you're just there one day, you're going to church for 3 hours. That's a lot, by the way. That's a lot. I can't get my kid. My kid is 5, so more than 30 minutes at church, the guy's already going nuts.
Yeah.
And so you grew up with that, because I understand Mormons will also take their kids quite early, and something must have happened. So you didn't just wake up one day and say, "Yeah, you know what? Just I don't want to be a part of this anymore." So walk us through that.
So in the LDS church, you have callings. So especially at the lower level, there's not like paid clergy, right? So when you go to your local congregation, it's all kind of being run by the local members. And my calling after I got back from my mission when I was 21, I was basically in the nursery right from when I got married. And I got married fairly shortly after at 22. Me and my wife were in the nursery where we were watching the kids while all of the adults were in class for like 3 years, which is a really long time.
Just one question about that. You're saying that you have a calling. So is this something that you choose, or is this something that somebody chooses for you? Because I learned from Kent that the mission is you don't pick the location, and you got to pay for it anyhow, right?
Correct. Yeah. Basically, all callings in the church are you are called upon. So the bishop in this case was the one who called us to the nursery, both when we were living down in St. George and then when we moved up here. So I joke that that's why I left the church. Of course, that's not actually why I left the church, but being in charge of nursery, it's 2 hours long. So like you go to at the time it was 3-hour church. Now it's 2 hours, but at the time it was 3 hours. You'd go to the 1-hour meeting with everyone. So everyone's sitting there with their families. And then for the next 2 hours, everybody kind of splits up and goes to their individual classes. So for those full 2 hours, my wife and I are entertaining 20 1 to 3-year-olds. And
that sounds like incredibly fun. Yeah. That sounds like I take care of mine, and there is this saying that God made kids cute, otherwise we will kill them.
Yes.
Right. So it's there for a reason. It's tough job. So, but it has to, you acknowledge yourself that that's a joke. That's not why you take such a leap of. It's not a leap of faith, though. It's the opposite of a leap of faith, whatever that is. But
yeah. So what actually do you want me to get into what made me start to want to leave?
Yes, man. I want to get you in trouble.
The interesting part. Yeah. Okay, cool. So I'm 24, married, no kids. I have this nursery calling, and I have a bunch of friends that left the church. That's a thing that happens. There's really been, I would say, especially in Utah, there's been a lot of people leaving over the last 5 or 10 years. And a big part of that, or I should say a big contributing factor, is that there's this guy, his name is Jeremy Runnels, and he wrote this letter called the CES letter. It stands for Church Educational System. And it's like 100 pages long. I'm pulling it up so that I don't say too many incorrect things, but if you're curious about it, it's cesletter.org. And it's basically this guy who was a really, faithful member that put together and compiled a big list of just issues that he had with the church. And it was kind of going a little viral in my community at the time. So I started reading it. And the CES letter contained a bunch of stuff that I just didn't know about. Whether or not it's true, I just had no idea that this was even a conversation that was taking place at the time. Things about how many wives Joseph Smith had and how young they were when he married them. Things about, actually, I'm not sure if this next part's in the is in the book itself, but like things about how like the temple ceremonies, the stuff that goes on inside the temple, has changed over time. And I just didn't know about all this stuff. So I started doing a bunch of research. And long story short, it only took about a month to like really get brushed up on all of this stuff. And it gave me a lot of doubts about like, okay, is this organization really like God's one true organization? Because that's an interesting thing about Mormonism that, you know, is not the case for, say, non-denominational Christianity, right? To be a non-denominational Christian, you really just have to believe that, you know, Jesus is the Son of God, that he came, that he died, that he rose the third day. You don't have to believe too much about any sort of modern day authoritative organization.
Well, you're doing the Catholic Church that I'm a part of today.
Yeah,
but
you do the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
But and I don't know too much about the Catholic Church, but I know that in the Mormon faith, it's like taken very, very seriously. Like the president of the church is considered a prophet that like speaks directly with God, you know, on the day to day. So you really need to have a lot of trust in this organization. So having, you know, your trust in the organization eroded makes you question everything, basically.
Everything. It's a good analogy, because I was thinking about that. The question I was going to ask you, and we can talk about that, is exactly this. Like, how do you go from, okay, as a teenager, I would presume you believe in God. You believe in the claims that are being made there. So how do you go from, I don't want to be a member of this organization anymore, to like those philosophical or metaphysical claims about the nature of reality are false?
Yeah.
But the analogy that crossed my mind is something like all of those people who hate math because they had a bad math teacher, right? Especially, is this the right direction for what happened to you? It's like, oh, I used to trust this teacher. I used to trust this authority figure. And look, the one thing I'm not going to do, especially because I'm not Mormon, I'm not LDS, is go into whether this letter is right or wrong, or like, I'll leave that to you and Kent and others. But like taking you at face value that you saw those things, and then right or wrong, you came to agree with them. It seems to me like a similar process. Then, like I had my wife, for example, she took German at school, and essentially she didn't continue because I just don't want to take classes from this person. Like so I don't want to learn German anymore. Right? Yeah. She could have thought I would go find another German teacher, but the first reaction is, why would I learn German? Now I have a better explanation to why wouldn't I learn German. It's like, it's so incredibly hard to do in my life. But like for her, that's what happened, right?
So I did not spend a whole lot of time, like basically once my faith in the organization, the institution of the church was lost, like that happened fairly quickly, like at least to me. And again, there's a lot of people that wouldn't agree with this, but you know, to me, like the evidence seemed fairly damning. And so I was fairly quickly kind of like out of Mormonism. And then the next logical question is like, okay, great. So I grew up believing in this church. Is it just that like Mormonism is wrong, right? Or kind of the LDS faith is wrong, the LDS institution is wrong? Should I go to, you know, some sort of looser, like non-denominational Christianity? Should I investigate other churches? And basically my conclusion was, well, I should probably just like zoom all the way out and try to figure out what the hell's going on. Because would you agree with the statement that, like, for the most part, people kind of just give an insane benefit of the doubt to whatever belief they like were raised with, the belief like that their parents had, and that it's, for example, more likely that people will be raised in that faith than, you know, give like just take your pick of a different one?
Yeah, I think statistically that's true. I mean, the reason I don't relate to that too much is that I was a very rebellious kid.
Yeah.
So for me, it was kind of the opposite. Like whatever my folks grew up with, that was the thing I absolutely did not want to do. Yeah. But I think statistically speaking, you are correct. I mean, obviously, like that's why you have that's why I have whole countries and cultures that for millennia will follow a certain path, because that is what everybody around you is doing. So I think statistically, you're absolutely correct. Yeah.
Yeah, like you said, there's lots of special examples, special cases, but I think generally speaking, that's the case. And so I was like, okay, let's just zoom all the way out and like see what's going on. And so then it was really the next year. So let's say it took like just a month or 6 weeks for me to kind of deconvert from Mormonism. It took maybe another year for me to kind of start using this label of atheist, because it took a lot longer to do that kind of investigation. So I spent maybe 1 or 2 hours a day, like watching, reading philosophical arguments for the existence of God, the non-existence of God. I tried to get a good mix of Christians, Muslims, Jews. Did a little bit with like, Eastern stuff, but to be honest, like just to be perfectly frank, probably didn't give it the
Absolutely.
the time that it deserved. But I really got hung up on like the big questions. And anytime I heard people talking about the big questions, I kind of came away convinced that like the right answer to me was, we just don't have evidence for this stuff. Things like, why does something exist? Why does something exist instead of nothing? Right. And that's really where I spent the majority of my time thinking and, developing opinions around that.
When you say we don't have evidence, do you believe we don't have evidence either way, or you don't have evidence for this particular claim? Because why, for example, why wouldn't you call yourself an agnostic, which is the most, I don't like being on the fence, but it is the on the fence position, right?
So whenever I'm talking to an individual person, like I'm talking to you now, it's really important, I think, to like, okay, what do I mean by agnostic? What do you mean by agnostic? Like, we got to get the definitions right. So the reason I don't like the term agnostic generally is because I think to a lot of people, it implies some sort of like in the middle or 50-50, right? Like,
well, that's how I just defined. So for me, I define it like that. So that's absolutely how I understand it.
Yeah, and I don't like that definition because that's not what I believe. I don't think it's I don't think it's an accurate representation of what I think. The way I would describe my belief is I don't believe I have good evidence for the existence of a God. And when you say it like that, it's like, okay, so you're actually pretty sure there's no God. You're open to you're open to changing your mind should evidence come forth, right? And you're not asserting that there is no God. You're not saying have evidence that proves there's no God. But the claim is much more powerful in the direction of like, I have no reason to believe a God exists, right? It's not this like 50-50. That's why I don't like the term agnostic, and I prefer to just use atheist.
Well, I like your position, because if you're intellectually honest, I think you should be willing to change your mind about anything. So if to use a term, you would have to be 100% of what the term, of the existence or non-existence of the inner workings of that thing. You will not be able to make a claim about anything, right? So what do you believe? Because you can be proven wrong, and if you cannot be proven wrong, then what's the point? Like that's not even knowledge worth having. So I like your characterization. Like you think that, okay, given what I've seen, I'm on this camp, and I'm only saying that I could change my mind because I have to, because 2024 and people want to fight, and but you'll be open to changing your mind.
Yeah, a big difference is like the difference between evidence for a position and lack of evidence for a position. So like where I'm at is like, I don't have any evidence really that there's no God, because like, especially if you define God in a really vague terms,
broad
like,
way. Exactly.
Someone that sits outside of the universe. And like, there's literally no way to disprove something like that. So like, why would you even try? And so that's why I describe it as just a lack of sufficient evidence that there is, any particular description of a God.
So your only religion today is Golang.
Yes, and I preach the religion from the rooftops.
Yeah, awesome. Do you have a negative opinion? And I was not honest, I guess not too much honest back then, but like if within friends, I would admit. In public, I guess I would never say, so don't feel too pressed. But like Does that mean that you do hold a negative opinion of people who reach a different conclusion of you, looking at all of this evidence that you did, or you really just think it's a matter of like, hey, look, I mean, different people looking at different things may reach different opinion?
Yeah, it's a really good question. When I first like just after I had left religion, so like 24, 25. Yeah, I would say I definitely had kind of a like, man, like now that I've seen that this is
Yeah.
BS, like how have you guys not seen this? Like
Yeah.
this is,
Yeah.
but I always have been really sympathetic because I mean I spent 2 years and not just 2 years like putting life on pause, but 2 years putting life on pause in like a not at all fun way. Like being a Mormon missionary, despite what people will tell you about like how great of an experience it is, and especially if you are still a believing member, like it is in a lot of ways a really great and uplifting experience, but it is really, really hard and it is not fun. And so I guess my point with that is I get how you could. I sympathize with the idea that like you can have all of these beliefs and just the way I would characterize myself at the time was that I hadn't thought super hard about them. That's not a fair assumption about people like you, right? There's a lot of people out there that have thought really hard about their beliefs. And that was something that I think when I was younger, I didn't appreciate as much as I do now.
Okay. So what you're saying here, let me repeat this back for you, is that like you kind of understand that the person, like a person like you or people would have been raised in this context, and then you never really question that. And that's fine because look, there are many things in your life today that you probably haven't had the click to question. So that doesn't say anything about your mental acuity. But today you see people, so you didn't necessarily have I don't think I fully get your point. So like
I think I overgeneralized. So 5 years ago, I think I overgeneralized and assumed that all religious people were just
didn't look into that
religiously
if they were
and weren't looking into it. Yeah, because like that's what I did. Like just to be perfectly honest, and then I started looking into it and I left. So my assumption was if you look into it, you're going to leave too. Since then, I've definitely developed a much more nuanced opinion. I was actually just talking with Adam.
That makes sense.
Elmore about this, and I've been very surprised. Like I think I've been very surprised to find that I have not noticed any correlation within like my social circles between whether you're religious or not and like how knowledgeable I perceive you to be or how, educated I perceive you to be. I've been very impressed with both sides of the aisle in terms of, just raw intellect.
And back then you would have expected this correlation. That's what you're saying? Because if you would only look at the data, right, just you would obviously come to agree with me.
Correct.
Yeah, so Dev is saying that some of the smartest scientists were religious. There is definitely no correlation, and it's a great point you bring because I bring this point sometimes. I don't love this argument too much about like but sometimes depending on the context, I do bring it up. And one of the answers that people give to this, especially when we're talking about Renaissance scientists, like from the early days of the scientific method, is that of course they were religious because everybody was. So they didn't really have a chance and they didn't really have a choice and they didn't really have another intellectual alternative. And this is false for two reasons. First of all, they did. There was public atheism in the Middle Ages. There were lots of people who wrote articles and extensively wrote about why they thought God does not exist. So this position was completely permissible in the Middle Ages. Obviously, you can make the case that we have more data to support the other part of that equation today. So like they had the case, but they had less data. But also because some of those scientists were probably just secular people living on a religious context. That's true. But man, some of them were not. If you go look, for example, at Isaac Newton, Isaac Newton was a religious freak. Like they would
He's an
put any
alchemist.
modern, yeah. Well, it just and again, and what some people would say is that the alchemist, as in the precursor to chemistry. No. Like the guy was a complete like zealot, and he was Isaac Newton. So it's just essentially one of the founding fathers of modern science. So I definitely that is one of the things early on that helped me see things in a different way. Right, was learning through those things. Right, learning that I mean, you know what, that just there are a couple of people that if I can't say that those people are smart, then this word is good for nothing. Like if you can't say that Isaac Newton is not smart, then what does the word even mean? But I fully
So the one that always surprised me was how religious Tolkien was. I'm a big Tolkien fan.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you can tell.
Well, no, I see you have a framing behind you, but I can't really see what that is. But yeah,
it's a 3,000 piece puzzle that my wife did. Lord of the Rings.
Awesome.
Fan art. Yeah, it's great. He was famously very, very religious. In fact, Roman Catholic, I believe.
Roman Catholic, exactly.
And Tim and C.S. Lewis, I guess. So I don't paint this idea of like the Middle Ages and Renaissance men in black and white. Like to your point, atheism or a lack of a belief in a God has always existed to some extent. I do think that it was much less prevalent then than it is now. The world has definitely become more secular, in my view, especially in the West. And I think that plays a big part. But like I said, I don't think there's this idea. You'll hear a lot of prominent atheists say things like, God is the God of the gaps. So, for example, Greek and Roman times, the belief that the gods must be hurling lightning bolts was around because they didn't have another way to explain lightning bolts. So they had these deities and they explained this phenomena that they don't understand through the deities. And the argument basically goes that throughout the ages, as we've come to understand more and more things, we basically just stop attributing things to God or to the gods and attribute them to science instead, to the point where you can essentially be an atheist that believes in a God that doesn't like muddle in the affairs of the world at all. And I think that's more or less true depending on who you're talking about. But I think that like the idea is actually sound in the sense that in the psychological sense. So if you're a scientist, I think it is very reasonable to discover a new thing, understand it, right? Experiment on it, add it to your kind of canon of knowledge, and have it not affect your views on God in the sense that like, God just moves one layer up in the metaphysical.
The definition that you put there is the famous God of Espinosa that Einstein was known to adhere by. But have your position changed at all in those 5 years? So like you just left the church and say whatever, no, and then you become like this atheist person, believing that like the only reason why anybody would ever believe this crap is because they haven't looked into that. And now you're different. Like you go through this evolution.
Push back there.
Okay.
I don't believe that second part.
But you believe back then that's what I was struck getting people through this journey, and now you don't believe that anymore. Do you even care? That's the thing. Is this something in your life that you keep researching and you keep looking, or is it just some? You know what? I looked into that, and that's my conclusion, and that doesn't influence my life too much anymore. How is this for you today?
I do care. Okay. Yeah, actually, I do care a lot, which is part of the reason I was so excited to come on the pod.
Yeah.
And there's a few reasons for it. One is, so my wife is still LDS. She's still an active member of the church. And so our oldest daughter is 3 at the moment, and like that presents some interesting challenges.
It does.
Like
Yes.
how we're going to deal with that, what we're going to present as truth versus what we're going to present as this is something for you to like figure out on your own and look into and things like that. The point I wanted to clarify about like how my views have changed is that, yeah, I definitely would not say that believing in God is just like, you're just gullible. Like, I do
Hmm.
not think that's the case at all.
Hmm.
In fact, I really like this theory about like if you keep taking humans and like running new experiments on them, they'll probably keep coming up with religion in some form or another. I think there's
Hmm.
like really good evolutionary reason why a form of religion will exist, uh, in the sense that like it's actually good for survival. Like
Hmm.
I think there's actually merit to this idea that if you have a population that's religious and a population that's not, the religious population might just do better. Like whether or
Hmm.
not the actual beliefs when you dig into them are literally true or not, um, I think they can provide like a framework that may actually have evolutionary benefits. And so it doesn't. It's like, so how could you fault someone, right, for just following that sort of a framework, if that makes sense?
Hmm. Do you believe that something can be psychologically true, even if it's not physically true? And I'll give you
Yeah,
an
I'll
example.
still.
If you read a story, Tolkien, for example, it's
Mhm.
obviously not true in the sense that, best of my knowledge, those events did not take place.
Yeah,
Or did they, Blaine? Maybe you disagree with me on that,
I
but like,
wish.
best of my knowledge,
I wish they did, but they didn't. Yeah.
best of my knowledge, those characters are fictional. But they can still be true in the sense that they tell you something true about the nature of human interactions. Because people,
Yes.
I think, and I just want to clarify something here. That is not my position. Okay, just but I want to maybe meet you in the middle there. Like, I am a believer. After 20 years of atheism, I believe in the Catholic Church, as we say in the end of the creed. I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church. And for me, this was a big journey coming from where
Mhm.
you are today. And don't get me wrong, I'm not implying that this has to happen with you or will happen with you, but it happened with me.
Yeah.
And but I guess, like, just to play with this idea, sometimes you talk about science, and there's this thing about reality. Like, I'm looking at reality, and then I'm using this beautiful tool, this incredibly powerful tool, science, the scientific method, to understand reality. But there's
Yeah.
also another reality, which is the reality of the human psyche, right? And the reality of the human interactions, that you can model sometimes with a study, but it's not at the same level of science than, for example, physics, in which I run an experiment, I
Right.
understand that I have this law. Uh, so how do you view this? Like, do you believe you can even
Yeah.
use the word true for this? Like, is Tolkien telling you something true, even though through a fictional story, or like, once something is based on fiction, is necessarily false?
No, so I definitely agree with the idea that it can teach us something true. And so Brett Weinstein has this great example that I'm just going to steal,
Hmm.
um, where if you're a human and you believe that porcupines can throw their quills, you'll stay farther away from porcupines than you would otherwise, right?
Hmm.
If you believe that they can actually throw their quills 5 or 6 feet, you'll give them a wider berth as you walk around.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
but they can't. They can't actually throw their quills. But it is very plausible that believing that they can throw their quills is actually good for you. Um,
Yeah, but being
if that
good for
makes
you
sense.
is different. Being good for you is different than being true. So what
Right.
I'm trying to explore here is there a level? Because I can't see how, in any level, this statement will be true. Say porcupines, it can be good for you, but it cannot be true.
Well, so the idea
But
is that there's a lesson. There's a lesson to
yeah.
learn from this idea. So, like, we could take the Bible for example. I
Hmm.
believe that it says a lot of things that are just literally false, right? But that it also says a lot of things that if you believe them and if you
Mm-hmm.
do them, that they'll be good for you, right? They'll be good for you. They'll be good for society, right? They'll lead to a more cohesive and maybe a society that works better together, right? Things like the golden rule, or even better, the silver rule. So it's like we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's like a lot of
Mm-hmm.
really good stuff in the Bible, and I do sometimes worry when fellow atheists like it just, if it comes from the Bible, it's garbage. Not saying that all
Well,
atheists are that way.
I was exactly, I was. It's just
Yeah,
100%.
it happens, and like the reality is, there's a lot of really good stuff that Jesus says in the Bible. And I do believe, by the way, I don't know, we haven't talked about this yet, but like I do believe in the historical Jesus. Like I do think he
Mm-hmm.
existed, that he was around. And that's just but the difference becomes like, is this good wisdom because it was passed via divine revelation from a higher power, or is it just good wisdom, right? Like, did some of the really best ideas make their way into scriptural canon? And that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of where I land these days.
Give me one example of something that you really appreciate from our holy book.
Yeah. I think a very common one that you'll hear all the time that I'm very much in agreement with is the idea of just turning the other cheek in forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
Forgiveness being a big one. That's like the whole redemption arc of the Bible, right? Is repentance and forgiveness. And even if you don't believe in like a divine
Mm-hmm.
washing clean of sins, the idea that you'll be better off and everyone will be better off if you can make up, forgive each other, move on. Like even after I've left the church, forgiving people
Mm-hmm.
has basically always been a good idea. And the interactions that I've had where one of two parties, whether it was me or somebody else, we weren't able to like just get over something and move on, like that's just super toxic. And like
Mm-hmm.
I think it's beautiful that that's like one of the central themes of the New Testament.
Is there anything in the Book of Mormon and or other parts of the Mormon tradition that you hold to the same level of esteem? Or?
So the Book of Mormon, and I'd encourage anyone that's actually curious to go read it, because it's a very easy read if you're used to the Bible. It's just shorter, and it was only written 200 years ago, so just a little easier to follow. It's very similar to the New Testament and the Old Testament. A lot of the same themes exist. The history is very different. It's a history of the Americas rather than the old world. And so really a lot of the same ideas crop up, and a lot of the bigger differences between like Mormons and maybe some other Christians come down to like theological clarifications. And that's something that as an atheist, it's like, there's like one heaven versus three heavens. Like that's not like a life lesson I can kind of take away.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of soft lessons in the Book of Mormon are very, very similar to those of especially the New Testament. There's some weird lessons in the Old Testament. I don't know if you'd agree with that statement, but there's some weird shit happening there. So, and then of course, in Mormonism, you also have two additional books. You've got the Doctrine and Covenants. That's like modern revelation, mostly from Joseph Smith and Brigham Young. And then you've got the Pearl of Great Price, which is like an additional book that basically the idea is that, for example, it's scripture from Abraham that Joseph Smith found and then later translated apart from the Book of Mormon. So it's really like a lot of clarifying stuff. So things that like other denominations might argue and bicker about, Mormons like claim to have a very hard stance on.
Dev is essentially asking if this is a DLC or an expansion pack for the Bible interview.
That's a good way of thinking about it. Yes. I would say Mormonism is Christianity DLC.
Okay.
Hopefully that doesn't offend anyone, but it is a funny way to put
it. Look, man, the one thing that hasn't changed about me throughout the ages is my very peculiar sense of humor. So I keep being... I keep laughing at stuff that maybe I shouldn't, but I can't stop it.
I mean, the idea, like family values, like when I left the church, almost nothing about my life changed. And that's not true of
Okay.
all atheists. Like I
Hmm.
picked up coffee, which ironically I now regard as a mistake. Like I probably shouldn't have done that because now I'm addicted to coffee when before I could wake up at 7 and feel fine. Um,
Hmm.
so, but like I don't drink very much. I'll have maybe a couple drinks a year. It's not something I particularly enjoy. I'll really only, have a drink if everyone else is having a drink. Um, like still have my family, my kids, still very important to us. Gonna have more kids. Um, like nothing about my day-to-day life really changed other than like I don't go to church, which again, it actually is worse. Like in a lot of ways, I took a hit because
Yeah.
living in Utah and not going to church kind of sucks. Like I like being closer with my neighbors, right? And knowing everyone
Hmm.
in the neighborhood and things like that. And so that is one of the more unfortunate things about my life at this moment is like, yes, we know a couple of our neighbors that live right close around us, but like I know that they know everyone in the local area. And I just don't, even though we've been here for 4 years, I just have a few friends that we know. Um, so
Do you
that
feel?
is
Do you
another
feel
thing that
so?
like I just
Yeah.
appreciate.
I want to like another reason why I thought the conversation with you would be so interesting is that look when people when I make this claim that religious people are a little bit persecuted in STEM,
Hmm.
what I hear being brought up sometimes is, poor you guys, because I mean religious people do persecute other people as well. And I think the lesson here is that it's just tough to be a minority in human affairs, right? Just because I think every religious people or institution would acknowledge this. This thing has been conduced here by people, right? So the Catholic Church is one example, is a group of people that at its best can do amazing things, at its worst can do terrible things, and most of the time it's in the middle. So the end of the day is just people, and minorities usually don't do well in groups of people. So like
Yeah.
being religious, you're scorned, but because in the subfield of tech, we are the minority. But if you go to society at large, then obviously things are different, and you can, and I do acknowledge that. Like when I was an atheist, I suffered the other side of that, and like there were a lot of circles in my family, in particular, that like saying that will be the end of the conversation. I just viewed differently.
Yeah.
Uh, so the dynamic with you is interesting because you still live in Utah, which is probably the most religious state in. So you have you have your job, you have your group of friends from X and technology, but then when you step out of this bubble, you are in the most religious state in the United States. I presume. I guess it is, right? So how does that
I think
dynamic work
so.
for you? Do you? Yeah.
Yeah. So one thing, like, I have a lot of positive things to say about Mormonism
Mhm.
too. One other
Yeah.
thing that's like really great about, especially like modern Mormonism, is Mormons for the most part are like really nice. There's like a Joe Rogan
Man,
clip where he's talking about how
that
like they're
that
just
is
so
true.
damn
Yeah.
nice, and like it is true. I always
Yeah.
feel like sometimes we go to the events. Because there'll be like a community event at the church and like always feel super welcome.
Hmm.
There's not like this shunning that happens
Okay.
in some other um religions. So, like that's super great. Um I do think that like if like you said, if I was living in San Francisco, like I would be in the majority, especially
Yeah.
in tech. Um Here in Utah, like it's evened out a lot, but generally speaking, at most jobs that I've been at, it has been majority religious. Um, Particularly, I think because I'm in Utah County and not in Salt Lake County, where it might have been a little different.
Hmm.
Um,
Why are Mormons so nice, Lynn? Because look, this is true. This is true. Mormons are the nicest people ever, by a large margin. By a large margin, they're large. They're nicer than us,
We're nicer than
and
Canadians.
nicer
Canadian
than
Mormons are
Canadians.
just
Yeah,
out of
exactly.
control. It's
Yeah. Why is that? Why is that? Is this Does that come from the culture? Does that come from a specific claim about the world that Mormons would have that obviously influences the culture?
I could be wrong. I've thought about this a little bit.
Yeah.
There's not like a theological reason for it that I can come up with, like a
Hmm.
scriptural reason. The main reason I've kind of come up with is more of a cultural one, which is, I mean, I guess you could argue it's theological in the sense that there's like a prerogative in the Mormon church to go convert people to Mormonism. And being an asshole doesn't win people over very often. So uh, Mormons are very open to like making friends, particularly with non-Mormons, inviting them to events, inviting them to church, obviously going out as missionaries. And that stuff works when you're nice, right? And you're genuine and you're trying to have good conversations. So I think the culture is mostly due to the missionary culture. Like as a missionary, you have to be willing to just go knock on doors and have doors slammed in your face, right? Have people call you names as an 18-year-old and just keep doing it. And the only way you could do that is if you have a really, really positive attitude about it.
Do you guys get prepared for that? And when do you guys get prepared for that by the church when they say like, look, here's what's going to happen. You're going to go to those places. They're going to do this to you. Is this a pep talk that you receive, or you just show up and have to deal with the fact that this is happening to you?
So, it's changed over the years. Now it's more common for young women to also serve missions as well as young men. But particularly when I was younger, like if you were a young man in the church, like you are being prepared your entire life, right? You're singing songs in primary when you're 5 about how you're going to serve a mission. And it's important not to it's important not to downplay that. Like that's very important. Like the idea that every week you're being told that of course you will serve a mission. That's like what you've been called to do.
Oh, but are you being told that you're going to serve a mission and people are going to slam the doors at your face, or just you're going to serve a mission, right? Because those are two different things.
It starts out nicer. Like when you're a kid, you don't hear about that so much. But like, you know, when you're a teenager, you're being told real world stories about like, this is what, you know, your leaders or your mentors in your local area, like what their missions were like. So you get a lot more, to that, but it's definitely something you're prepared for psychologically for a very long time. And then the literal preparation of like being able to sit down and teach a lesson about the church or be able to speak the language, that is a lot shorter. I spent 6 weeks in Argentina studying Spanish and studying the missionary lessons. And it was just those 6 weeks. And you could argue there's a little bit of prep before that, like, you know, in seminary and things like that. But the reality is it's actually not that much. And those 6 weeks are really like a very intense all-day boot camp for the mission. And then the mission is a very intense all-day thing where you're a missionary from when you wake up to when you go to bed 7 days a week. I've never done anything in my life that's, including starting a startup with 2 small children, still not nearly as intense as a mission.
And man, that's insane. Have you converted anybody?
When I was on my mission?
Yeah. How good of a missionary were you? I guess it's the different way to pose this question is were you a good missionary?
Yeah. That of course is a very hard question to answer. I mean, I did my best. I had 9 converts technically over the course of the 2 years. Back up 20 years in Paraguay, and it was relatively easy as a missionary. And I will say 9 was like pretty par for the course when I was there. Like most missionaries that were there when I was there had 9, maybe. I think, you know, the best missionaries were maybe up in like the 20, 25 kind of numbers. But back in the 90s and 80s, like they were converting people by the hundreds. I think like access to internet, other things to do, a reduction of the like church's welfare program. I think a lot of those things played big factors in particularly Paraguay, like the missionary work being a lot harder. I was there in 2013.
Is this something that looking back, you feel bad about having done this at the end of the day? Because look, you don't believe any of that anymore today, but you instill this belief into someone. Do you feel about that in any particular way?
Yes, a little. We did do a lot of service that was not church oriented. And I obviously don't feel bad about that at all. Like it was great helping people. Like we helped people build houses. For example, that was probably one of my favorite things to do. cut grass, moved things, did chores for people. That kind of stuff, obviously, like very, very fulfilling to this day. The teaching, yeah, was largely a waste of time, unfortunately, in my view at the moment. And I mostly look at it as just a big, unfortunate waste of time. Like, where would I be in my life had I not spent 2 years just, wandering around? I mean, like I said, I wasn't all that successful. And of the 9 converts, many of them probably would have converted anyways, because they had like family in the church and stuff. So like we were just really there to facilitate everything. I think I only had 1 convert, maybe 2 that like I contacted like out of the blue, and then they ended up converting. Both of those are also, to my knowledge, no longer members. So it's like, I don't know. I don't know what kind of effect I had.
Yeah.
But I mostly look at it as just kind of an unfortunate use of my time, because I could have, graduated school 2 years earlier or whatever.
Yeah. So you've been not a Mormon for 5 years. And we discussed, again, for the benefit of whoever is tuning in now, that in the beginning you view things differently. Essentially, like if you ever looked into that kind of stuff, how can you believe any of that today? You're of course more lenient with that. Was there ever something that you read or came in touch with in those 5 years that say, you know what, that gives me pause? Maybe Mormonism is not true, like the church is not true, but something else is. I know that's now how you view it, but did anything ever give you pause about that?
Yeah. So there's a few things. If you talk to almost any believing member of the church, they'll tell you about some pretty incredible, well, I shouldn't say they won't always publicly tell you, but a lot of times they'll tell you more in private. Like pretty incredible experiences they've had that they would attribute to the divine, like, something kind of supernatural happened, and that this is like evidence for them that the church is true. I did never have that. And I was very open. I was one of the few missionaries on my mission that I knew of that was like pretty open with that. I was like, yeah, I've never had like this like miracle thing. I generally have this really good feeling when I go to church. Like, I think everything we teach is positive. I have every reason to believe it's true. Like, I say these sorts of things, but like, I didn't have this big. So like, I've heard some pretty wild stories that, especially initially, was like, those were some of my bigger concerns. It was just like, are all these people lying? Are they really that confused? Like, that they had these huge experiences. So it's always been like an interesting one to me, is like, seemingly everywhere you go, religious people have like seem to have had big miraculous experiences that I can't account for. And I have no explanation of, right? Someone tells me about their, seeing someone that was dead or something like that. And I'm like, I've got no explanation for you. I've never seen it. Like, but this is the best. This is kind of where the conversation has to stop, because also all you've got is a story. Aside from that, the big questions are still unanswered, is like the big one to me, right? Like I said, I have no reason to believe that there is a God sitting outside of the universe, but also like, it's really weird that we're here. Like, what the hell is this? You know what I mean? And so that to me has always just been the big one. And like, universe could be deterministic, right? There could be no such thing as free will. I don't know. But like, even if that's the case, still weird. Like, why are we here? Why even if this is a simulation, why is there a simulation? So there's all these ideas that.
But don't you find that funny? I came across the simulation argument in 2012. I think it's around the time it came out, and again, at the time it didn't. Later on, thinking about that, that was one of the many cracks. The way I usually explain my story is like, I had many cracks. I can attribute to one of them that led me to look into the issue again. Like, and then I found, for example, I completely disagree with you that there is no evidence, because I came to faith through evidence. But to go look into that evidence, I had to find some cracks in the story. And one of the cracks was the simulation argument. Because I couldn't fathom, like, why is it that us tech people, when the simulation came out, everybody was crazy about it. See, we finally know the universe. It turns out there is no God. The universe is a simulation, and I couldn't tell the difference between those two things, right? Because if this is a simulation, look, who wrote the damn simulation, right? I do know something. The simulation argument, in fact, I think makes the God hypothesis more likely, because one of the things that make a lot of people leave the faith is the so-called problem of evil. It's
Yes.
like if there is a benevolent God, why evil? And I now have the perfect explanation. The simulation was written in JavaScript. So,
I wasn't expecting that. That was good.
so that's where evil comes from, is essentially, right?
Our time step would actually
Exactly.
be much faster
Yeah.
if it wasn't
Yeah.
written in JavaScript. That's really good. The problem of evil is interesting to me, and I will say it is something that, like, it does bother me, and it is part of my reason for leaving to atheism. But this one might be. I want to bring this one up because I think it's this to me is like the big one that, like, until I have a good answer for this, I don't see myself becoming a theist again. Here it is. It's the problem of, I call it the problem of faith. There might be a more academic term for this. But the basic idea that, like, okay, let's zoom out. Let's assume an omnipotent, benevolent God for a minute. I understand why that God would be very interested in creating a bunch of rules around morality, right? We're going to create this reward for you. It's called heaven. We're going to create this punishment for you called hell. If you're good to other people, you get to go to heaven. If you're bad to other people, you get to go to hell. This all makes, like, perfect intuitive sense to me, right? There's some incentive structure, right? We've got this cosmological theology that has sound structure. What doesn't make sense to me is, like, okay, I'm testing you all to see if you're going to behave well or poorly. I've given you the rules. What doesn't make sense to me is now why there's this component of you have to believe in the fact that you're being tested at all. Like, why is it not enough just to do well? Why do I also need to add mystery to the equation? Because this is not something that we humans ever do. Like, when you take a test in school, it's not like you have to do well on the test, but also you have to believe whether or not the test exists to score.
But it's kind of,
like,
it's very obvious.
It's
very obvious that the test exists, right? The test is
right,
there.
and that's my point. Like, why is exactly. That's my point. Is, like, I know I'm being tested. If I were God designing this world, I don't think I would add this element of mystery to it. I feel like I would just pass down the rule set and let's see who does well and who doesn't. It's strange to me that a God would be interested in demanding faith, I guess is the point.
Now, I said I was a rebellious kid as a teenager, and in many senses, when you ask me, do you agree that, people raised in a particular culture will keep that culture? Statistically, yes. My case, I think it will be very different, because I always like to go counter, or I'm not like that anymore. But man, as teenage me, my son turns out like that, I don't think I can handle it. So kudos to my parents who could handle that individual. But anyway, one thing, I approached the problem of evil very differently, because one of the things that I was interested at some point was understanding if there is anything supernatural in this world. Like, can I ascribe anything to the supernatural? Because you made the point earlier, because you can't come up with a definition of God, which I think is useful in some ways, but is also, like, so abstract that anything can fit the definition. I agree with that, and I just don't think that is useless. I think there is a place in the set of arguments for that starting point. Hey, look, as a starting point, there is this thing here. But the problem of evil at some point actually made me more religious. In this very beginning, was one of the things that catalyzed this thing for me, which again is different. It's funny because it's the opposite of everybody else. But the reason for me that happened is that conceptually I could explain in my mind why good exists, because at the end of the day, good and bad is on the eye of the beholder, right? And
Are you a moral relativist, Glauber?
No, I'm not a moral relativist, but like you have to you have to look in some sense. Like I could explain. Well, I'm not today, but like if you take the evolutionary argument that you used earlier, if you take that to the extreme, essentially like things are good because they're good for our survival, and things are bad because they're bad for our survival. So I could easily see why we would ascribe the label good to certain things that happen. And so you see all those things that people claim to be an act of God, they're really just things that they are just random, but for us they're good because we call them good, and etc. But man, I really couldn't understand why would anybody would rape and mutilate a child. And like I couldn't. And at some point for me it was like, that's the devil. Right? And there's so much evil in this world because it's not just like a little bit bad. There are some things that happen if you go look, and I think in our society today we by and large shielded from the truly evil stuff that happens in the world, right? But man, if you go look into that, there is a sense in which there's so much evil in this world that I could actually ascribe the good things to chance, but I could no longer ascribe the bad things to chance. I said this, Emma, I don't have a beeping thing, but this motherfucker did that to a child, right? This has to be like, and I'm not saying this is proof of anything, because one of the things is that none of those things prove anything one way or another. This is all like a collection of arguments that you put together, and then you look at them, and then you try to put the puzzle together. Like, just the amount of evil that exists in the world did not seem random to me. So in some sense, I was the opposite of most people, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't really heard that take specifically. I do have a follow-up question, which is just that, like, that makes particular sense to me. Like, if you assume it's true, if the belief is that like the devil actually has some power that like God can't correct for. And I think where a lot of people take issue with, the problem of evil is the assumption is that like, God is allowing the devil to do these things, therefore he's complicit. So I'm curious, like, in your theology, do you actually believe that no, the devil has some power that like God is not able to control, and that's why there's evil happen? Like, God does not want this evil to happen. He's not even allowing it. I should rephrase that. God is not allowing this evil to happen. He, like, it's the devil is forcing his hand.
So I'm not a theologian, but in part I think that's the risk I took once I started the podcast. I am sure that a lot of people who have very strong opinions,
all the questions,
will hate me for it, and they will say, "How can you even call yourself this or that?" Like, but I do have very unorthodox opinions, and always had like a. So I was having this conversation with if you go look at arguments that people made. So let's start with the canon then. Like, if you go look at arguments that people made about the argument of evil, like religious people in the past debating atheists and talk about the religious the problem of evil, what they will say is the following. They will tell you in a nutshell that you don't have God's point of view. So sometimes, like, so you're not God. Like, just let's agree with that, because maybe you disagree. Like, then we should clear that up. Like,
we can agree on that. Yeah,
you can agree on that. Like, you're a good fellow. I like you, right? But in fact, well, parenthesis here, I used to tell a joke, which I don't anymore. I mean, I still think it's funny. But I'm a huge fan of Freddie Mercury. Like, it's probably one of So I love. So I would sometimes joke and say, look, I mean, I love Freddie. He's probably the best musician ever to set foot on the planet. I just don't like when people compare him to God, because look, say what you want about the guy, he was no Freddie Mercury, right? So like, just trying to invert this relationship a little bit. But what people will say is, you're not God. Freddie wasn't God. I'm not God. So you don't know what's going on in God's mind. I mean, you know parts of it. You know parts of it because there are hints of it through Revelation. Again, if you accept it, but even the people that accept Revelation just have no idea what goes on in the minds of God. Like, this is the one thing that religious people will acknowledge. Like, the hell do I know, right? So you never know, for example, if God allows evil punctually for a different reason. Like, so
Right.
it's playing chess. So you don't know, like, if this thing happened here today. So this is what I guess what a normal person, maybe a more responsible person than I am, would tell you. I realize I have a different view on that, which again can be, maybe it's completely heretical, but I realize that. So just to backtrack, because I haven't talked that much about my own journey, but like, I'm today a Catholic. If you're tuning in now, so one of the many things, like the most important thing that you accept as a Catholic person, is the figure of Jesus Christ and what happened to him at the cross and what happened to him after the cross, right? Which he came back from the dead, if you accept that. So I could not accept that this amount of evil was random, as I said. But I look at what happened and what I accepted, and I'm telling this story together. But for me, like, those things that happen across many different months, right? I'm just clumping them together. At some point, I also came to realize that what happened to Jesus is God's way of telling us that there is a meaning to that, right? Because imagine that, like, what you're accepting is that this person is God, and I truly fully accept that, like, without any beyond any reasonable doubt. And then he comes here, and he does not go telling people what to do. He does not go, like, issuing orders to people. He comes here and suffers. Right. So there's one thing that we describe to say, hey, that's the problem of evil. For me, was essentially this: like, this is God's way of saying that, like, there is a reason for that. Like, you may not see it, but even myself in the flesh subjected myself to that. So for me, really, the solution for the problem of evil is this: like, there is a meaning for that suffering, and may or may not know what that is. And the fact that God subjected himself to that is a way of saying that, look, that's, trust me, that's part of the story.
Yeah. So I've heard a lot of people talk about the problem of evil over the years, and you do have an interesting and unique take on it. I will definitely give you that. To me, the problem with the explanation is just that it to me, it's almost a non sequitur, in the sense that God works in mysterious ways, but, like, that doesn't tell us anything about. It's actually unfortunate, because
I would have never reached I would have never reached this conclusion from that point. I had to accept this other thing first through other means, and then putting in the puzzle. So
yeah. The problem is, of course, if from the outside, the explanation "God works in mysterious ways" sounds very
ridiculous,
because it basically means
he
can do whatever he wants, and there's nothing that we, like, mortal, like, feeble humans can tell about his actions, right? He could do, he could ask Abraham to kill his son, and of course he's doing it as a test, so it's okay. So, like, the problem of evil, like I said, it's not my primary concern as an atheist. Like, it's not the one I go to say, like, problem of evil, gotcha, like, theism is dumb. Because there is an explanation from theists. It's not one that convinces me, but I can see why the problem of evil would never convince a theist. It never convinced me. I'd heard of the problem of evil a billion times as a believing Mormon. It didn't, like, it never made me doubt a thing. It's like, whatever, God works in mysterious ways. Of course, like, this is all going to work out in the end. That's why this idea of the faith problem is really the one that gives me way more pause. And like I said, that's the one that, like, if I got a really good answer on that, that's one that could, make me take another good look at things.
So there's just the state again. What is the faith problem? Because you said that before, but now we contrast it with the problem of evil. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can give like a really concrete example.
Yeah.
So buckle up.
Let's do it, man.
Nazi
That's what
Germany.
we're here for.
Right. Yeah. So you're living in Nazi Germany, and there's this like creed, right? There's this set of things that you're supposed to do as a good member of the Nationalist Socialist Party, right? You're supposed to turn in the Jews, right? There's all these rules, and in any context, whether it's like party alignment, passing a test to get into college, right, beating people in a
you have to believe that's the central thing for you. You have to more than do. You have to believe. Okay.
And it's not just that you have to believe; it's that you have been provided with overwhelming evidence that the thing you're participating in actually matters, right? If you turn in the Jew, the Nazis will like you, right? If you get the math problem right, you will get an A on the test. There's no question about this. It's weird to me that in the theology that the supernatural being has designed, that he designed it in such a way that we don't know at all if the test even exists, right? All we get to know is that, all we have is a bunch of different people telling us that different tests exist, right? Everyone's got a different set of rules. Muslims have one rule, Mormons have another rule. So it's like, not only do you have to obey the rule, you first have to decide which test is the true test. And you're not given hard evidence on that. And to me, that is very strange. If I was an omnipotent being, I feel like I would make it completely obvious. There would be no faith component. I would just give the rules to the humans, right? And every, some people might still fail the test, right? They might still be assholes to their neighbors, and have to go to hell or whatever. But at least they know that they're playing the game. And so I have not yet heard a good explanation for why faith must exist, why faith must be a component of being saved.
Well, does it? Because, for example, if you go ask our Protestants brothers and sisters, they will completely disagree with you. No, actually, like there is their component, right? But just for them, whether or not you do the works doesn't matter at all. So I completely misspoke. It's the other way around. So you're saying like there is the set of rules that you have to follow, but like depending on the Protestant denomination, you don't actually have to follow the set of rules. You really just have to have the faith.
You just have to believe,
Yeah, but then again, if you go outside of Christianity, that is not a factor at all. So like, why don't you conclude then that just Christianity is false, and then this other thing there is not? Let's get a random example. Like in Judaism, even I don't think you have this component of faith.
Really? Is that true?
Well, not as a central thing you have to believe. I mean, most religions, like, and look, let's not get too spicy then. Let's talk about, because Judaism, of course.
Well, what I would say is like, let's just assume that that's true for a second, even if it's not.
Talk about the Roman Empire. My favorite.
Okay,
subject,
the
right?
Roman Empire, but
the Roman religion is a religion. Yeah. It's very centered around what you do. Go ahead.
Yeah. Even if you don't have to believe in order to be saved according to the given religion, there's still just like a fact of life that you got to pick something. Like you can't, be practicing pagan and a practicing Mormon at the same time just to cover your bases. So like, even if it's not required in the given faith that you have faith, it's still required that you believe that you're doing a test that will result in some positive outcome. Again, I would argue with like, it's not like these deities have come down and told us explicitly, this is the test, this is the way to do it, in a way that makes it so that we have no reason to doubt, because it's always like through some intermediary, like a prophet or an institution.
Well, yeah, I get it, and it's funny because if you go look at pagan religions, like the Roman religion, for example, they actually never had a problem with people believing in other gods as well.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
this notion, like a the
Add to the
problem they
pantheon, baby.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. One of the, you're telling me that there's this god here with those powers that does this and that, and like a sure, yeah, whatever. And I don't think there is also this idea of salvation. Like the way the Romans would structure their religion is essentially, hey, the gods are there, they're doing their thing, right? You're here, you suck, they're great, and that's it, right? There's no like
Yeah.
process of salvation. This is a very Judeo-Christian, because that Judaism does have like this process of like this is going towards something. Like the Romans didn't have any of that. Like this is going nowhere, baby. This is like this is it. This is it. They're doing their thing here. We're doing our thing there, and every now and then that meets. Uh, did you maybe over like look too much into Christianity then for those arguments and too little into alternatives?
Uh, I think that's certainly possible.
Yeah. Okay.
The reality is, like, living in America, of
Yeah.
course, Christianity is everywhere. Um, most of these arguments, though, like these big ones, like the faith argument, I do still think it applies to
Okay.
any like supernatural belief.
Hmm.
Even if, like I said, faith isn't actually required for some sort of salvation within the belief system. Just because you have to get to the belief system first. Like,
Okay.
you have to
Yeah.
believe in the belief system before it's like worth your time to go about obeying all of the rules, right? Um, but yeah, to your point, no. And that is also another just unfortunate reality of, like, there's just not enough time in the day. There's too many belief
Yeah.
systems out there to spend like all of your time investigating all of them. I do find it interesting. I listen to a YouTube channel called Religion for Breakfast.
Oh, I
It's
do
one of my
too.
favorites.
Yeah. Yeah, I do
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
Yeah.
I love that one. So like I do still keep up on things. But yeah, like the reality of just running a business and having kids, it's like
Oh yeah,
there's only
man.
so much time to investigate stuff.
That is 100% true. I have a pile of books here that are on my list. I just don't have time to read them.
Yeah. Yeah. And like we'll get to it. Like I do look forward to, hopefully, like when I'm older, maybe life is less hectic, have more time to do this kind of stuff. But
Do you feel sometimes that you would like to retire and then just go read books? Sometimes I feel like that. I mean, F databases, let those people store data wherever they want, and I'm just gonna go read a book every day.
Yeah, definitely. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm definitely not to that point where like I need to make it happen now, but I get tired. Like running boot
Yeah.
dev is not like, it's been way more of a sprint than a marathon. So I'm trying not to burn out on it. Hopefully
Do
someday
do
it slows down a bit.
do you plan to have more kids?
Yeah, we're planning on having one more. We'd like 3. And
Yeah.
then we'll be done. It's a lot of work.
You had this discussion with your wife that you mentioned, like, so she is still a practicing member of the LDS. And just to something here, like a dev, just to close the lid on the previous discussion, is that faith is a big component of Hinduism and Islam. Islam certainly, Hinduism I know very little about. I cannot talk to the theological aspects of Islam. I don't know well enough to say if that faith is required of you, because there's a big difference, like in the way a
Yeah.
Protestant would say, like you need to do this, or if you should do this, or if this is a
Yeah.
good thing. But it is definitely a component. My point was mostly that, like, a lot of religions, especially the old ones, like the Roman religion, and to Mike's, forgive me if I'm wrong, but to the best of my knowledge, even Judaism, in comparison to Christianity, is a lot more like centered in things that you do. Like you do those,
Yes.
you do this ritual, and like whether or not you believe that thing particular at that moment is less important than the act of doing it. And Christianity is absolutely not like that. Like just the act of doing it takes the backseat to the belief, even for Catholics. I think that's true.
Yeah.
So, have
And
you
even within
decided? Yeah.
Christianity,
No, go ahead.
sorry,
Just
I was gonna say,
uh,
even within Christianity, it's a hotly debated topic. Like, Mormons, for example, are very much a faith without works is dead, is kind of the
mhm,
stance, in the sense that, like, yes, you must have faith. Yes, you also must do the works. At the end of the day, you're saved by grace, but
mhm,
the way that you kind of show that you're the way you kind of show your faith is through works. And so it's like, if you don't have the work, it's like this catch-22 of like, well, if you don't do anything, then like God's not going to believe that you have faith, kind of a thing.
mhm.
But yeah, all sorts of religions definitely treat it differently.
We haven't in the West and within Christianity. We have not resolved this question in 500 years, so I don't have any. Like, it's not my intention to try to resolve it.
Yeah, yeah.
I have my side on it, but just especially, I'm not going there. But
Fair enough.
what I was getting to is, like, will you raise your kids in the church?
Um, I mean, that really depends on my wife. If my wife
Hmm.
was not religious, then the answer would definitely be no. I don't
Hmm.
see why I would. Um, but with my wife still being religious, we will have to figure out how to do that. So far, our conversations have mostly been centered around, like, of course, like, she'll be able to take kids to church. Um, the thing that I'm most, the thing that I'm like fighting for and rooting for the most is just that, like, I want my kids to be exposed to more ideas than I was as a kid,
Hmm.
and have a lot of religious ideas exposed to them in a way that is not presented as factual truth, and instead presented to them in a way that, like, just like, so a lot of people believe this, right? Mom believes
Hmm.
this, grandma believes this, other people believe this is a thing that people believe, but not as a, this is truth, this is something we've come to know for a fact. um and that's not just my kids. Like, I wish all kids were raised in more of that sort of a situation where it's like, okay, actually there's a lot of people that believe all sorts of things, and I think it's more than fine to expose kids to lots of different belief systems. I just want them exposed in a way that is not like mixing the idea of a fact and someone's faith together in one, because that is how it was presented to me, right? There
Hmm.
is God, that he does do this, he does believe that this did happen, just in the same way that I was presented with, like, history in school. And so, as a 5-year-old, you don't really know a way to tell a difference. um, so to me, it's not about sheltering them from religion, it's just about bringing religion to them in a way that's maybe more in line with what we can prove, if that makes sense.
No, that makes total sense. And look, I do agree that, like, we should all be exposed to all sorts of ideas. Your wife is on board with that. She's been essentially saying, "Hey, look, that's fine."
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like I said, push hasn't come to shove yet because my daughter's
Oh
only
yeah.
3,
Then
so I'm sure there will be many more conversations to be had. But yeah, it hasn't been like a big problem or anything in our marriage thus
you
far.
you have time. You have time, because, like, I've been so, like, just I was not going to baptize my kids, because my story was essentially like, if I'm a very truth oriented person. So I had pressure within my family, for example, hey, just do this thing, because that's the things that our family does.
Yeah.
And I was like, no way, just F off, or just I'm not gonna. Uh, at that time, I was already, like, almost there, so I had some sympathy, and I consider. But for me, the idea of, like, just going and baptizing my kids, and Catholics, of course, do infant baptism. Other
Hmm.
Protestants don't do, just. But it was it was just ridiculous. I was like, why would I do this? Like, why, absolutely insane that I would just do this. To Makes no sense, and I don't want to lie. I'm gonna go there, and this feels like a lie. So my first son, he was baptized. He was around 8 months, 8 to 9 months. So that was essentially the time it took for me to get those things into. But we've been taking them to church this whole time. But like they just play around, man. They don't do anything. It's just something that they do. It's just that it's not very different than anything else in their lives. Only now, my oldest is 5. Only now I can talk to him about some stuff, right? And still, like talking to a 5-year-old is you really have to bring it down. The expression Eli 5 doesn't come out of nowhere. I mean, just now thinking about it, yes, you can explain something to a 5-year-old, but man, it has to be in a completely different way. But before 5, it doesn't really matter. Like they're just there. It just doesn't do any difference.
I think I get what you're saying, and like I agree that, like, it's not like the theology is sticking, but I think like the introduction to characters and things and ideas and familiarity like does have a lasting impact, for better or worse. Like obviously, if you're a religious person, that's a good thing. That's what you want. That's why you take your kids to church.
My daughter is 2, and I don't know if she knows the difference between Jesus and the cranky bear.
Yeah, 2 probably is a little too early. I
right?
think my
See,
3,
but
though,
that's
like,
what I'm saying. Yeah.
Like my daughter's 3, and like she can understand, when something's real versus not real. Like we tell her that the scary things in the movie are not real, and she gets that, for the most part. In Mormonism, baptism is not till 8. So Catholics, infant baptism; Mormons, it's 8, and then I believe in like a lot of non-denominational like Christian stuff, it's like kind of whenever whenever you're ready. I think 8's too early. I don't. I've talked about this with my wife. Like, I don't think I'll take a hard stance. Like, you cannot get baptized if you want to when you're 8, right?
Yeah.
Talking to my daughter, but at the same time, like, I do think it's definitely too early. Like, I understood very, very few things about the church when I was 8. Right? You have not gone through the temple yet. You have not served a mission yet. Like, you haven't been exposed to a lot of ideas yet when you're still 8. So I don't love that. I would like that to happen later, but
do you have a choice? Because like in the Catholic Church, you're usually baptized as a kid, but you don't have to. You can come at any time as well. It's just you can't do it twice, and your family probably did it to you, but you can as an adult to show up, right?
Correct me if I'm wrong. Well, just tell me. Like, say that heaven forbid. That's an ironic phrase in this conversation, but God forbid. Your was it your son you said that was baptized when he was 8?
8 to 9 months. Yeah, 9 months. He was around 9 months of age. Yeah.
Had he passed away before that, like, what do you believe would have happened?
I have no idea.
My understanding, and this is as a Mormon being taught about Catholicism from Mormons, so I don't know how true it is, but my understanding is that, like, the reason for infant baptisms is like, well, if you're not baptized, you go to purgatory. So we got to baptize you as quick as possible. That is not what Mormons believe. Mormons believe that if you die before the age of accountability, so like 4 or 5-year-olds, like you just go straight to heaven. Mormonism is a very optimistic religion, as it turns out. And there's a lot of ways you
maybe that's why you guys are so nice.
Yeah,
because everything is so upbeat, right? Yeah.
But once you turn 8, now all of a sudden it starts to get real, and you need to be baptized and all that kind of stuff. So, but yeah, I guess I disagree with LDS Jesus on this one and say 8's still too early to understand this kind of stuff. I don't know. 18 is kind of what we've decided in the United States is a reasonable age for things. Yeah. Maybe 16. I don't know, somewhere in there.
Yeah. Look, and again, going into potential heresy territory again, which might be one of my favorite things to do. And I really don't mean anything bad out of that. It's just I think my mind works in very interesting ways sometimes. But I think that even there are a lot of religious people that are very simple in their thought, right? And another thing that I came to understand is that a lot of the opposition to religion sometimes comes from this very simple understanding. That is the most widespread. Is like whatever my aunt would say about heaven and hell. Like if you were to go ask my aunt, she would definitely say, or any of them, because my father, as I mentioned to Kent the other day, my father had 12 siblings. So they were a family of 13. And if you go ask most of them, they would probably have said, yeah, if your kid dies, that we want you to baptize your kid, either because it's what we do, which is, or like because we want them to go to heaven, and you need to be baptized to go to heaven. But even if you go look into one thing that did me really well was go read figures like Thomas Aquinas and Augustine and people who treat religion very seriously at the philosophical level, and then you see that the what those people are talking about had nothing to do with what the general populace is talking about.
Yeah, it's
and
very different.
I decided that if I want to make this claim about like I'm an atheist because because I'm so rational, I had to at least go engage with those folks and not with my uncle, right?
Yeah.
And you see that those people will have a much more nuanced view of like, you do good things, you go to heaven, you do the bad things, you go to hell. Right? It's way more nuanced than that. And then the Pope the other day got under fire for saying that he certainly hopes that hell is empty. Like, and note that he was not affirming that hell is empty, which right. I guess would be heresy in Catholicism. He was not saying that like I know for sure that's that, but he did say that like in his mercy, I certainly hope that hell is empty, which I think is a fair thing to say. I mean, you first of all, because you can hope whatever you want, but I'm in this camp. I mean, like I don't know. I think God can do, as I said, he's a merciful but fair figure, and maybe this was necessary for my son to go to heaven. Maybe wasn't, and I truly don't know. Maybe is necessary in general, but he would have had mercy of him because I would pray, or maybe not. So the true answer is I don't know. I have no idea, right? Just and I think people. Dev made a comment earlier that I ended up not reading through the stream. Like, it's funny how sometimes for theists the answer just is don't know. And in my atheist phase, I mean, I took a lot of pride in saying that like I don't know. And sometimes people use that as an argument, like, oh, I'm not religious because I'm comfortable saying I don't know. Sometimes we just haven't figured that out yet. Science will get there. I think I carry a lot of this I don't know thing with me, and the best religious people do too.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I will say, sounds like I agree with the Pope. Like I do hope that hell is empty, and the main reason being like one thing that never sat well with me was the idea of eternal punishment for, I should say, infinite punishment for finite crimes. Right? Like, think about the worst thing you could do on this planet. You could do some pretty terrible things, right? You gave the example of like raping and murdering a child. Like this is like really, really bad stuff. But to zoom out, it is finite, right? Thank goodness, like the suffering does end. And one of the things that's never sat well with me is like that you could suffer for eternity for fairly, not in the example of rape and murder, of course, but like you could suffer an eternity in by some people's rules for like fairly innocuous crimes. And I never liked that. I like the idea of progression. Like if I'm going to be around, it'd be really nice if I could better myself and do better and move on and progress and all that kind of stuff. And so that's just, but
by the way, this is where the Catholic doctrine of the purgatory comes from.
Tell me more.
Because like Protestants would usually say correctly that this is not explicitly in the Bible, like many things are not. Like the Trinity is not explicitly in the Bible,
right?
But you can read it in some way. They say, hey, like and this is what usually theologians would do, like Aquinas as an example. Like, look, given this and this and this and that, like the understanding that we have of this collection of things is this thing probably exists, and it comes, and again, I'm not a theologian, I will butcher parts of that, but it comes from this idea that from God's mercy, right, there has to be something in between, in the sense that like you're not damned in this situation. Like you are in this place, and again, I do not believe those things are literal things. I believe they can be helpful concepts, and they might exist in some way that our mind translates to those concepts. But it comes essentially from this idea, and the Orthodox Church actually has a spin on the concept that I like it even more, which they call it theosis, like this process of you getting closer and closer and closer to God. So Orthodox do not believe in a binary salvation. You dead, and now you either screwed, or you go here or you go there. They believe that you are in a process of approaching, like of getting yourself closer and closer to God, and this process does not end when you die, right? So this process can still go on, and like I think the Catholic version of that is purgatory, essentially.
Yeah. I mean, that's not that I think it makes it any more true, but that at least sounds better
Yeah.
to me.
Well,
I'm definitely more into that idea. The Mormons have an interesting idea of it's called spirit's prison, or more generally the spirit world. And so, like, if you die, and like let's just say that you die and you have not had sufficient teaching. Well, sorry, I'm screwing up my theology. Let me back up. If you die and you're not baptized, right? You haven't like accepted. You're not like practicing Mormon. You go to spirit prison. It's not all that bad of a place. It's not like hell or anything like that. It's like this is where you wait for the second coming of Jesus, when everyone will be judged. And the nice thing about spirit prison is that you can actually like learn the gospel there. And so the teaching basically goes that there will be missionaries in spirit prison, like teaching people the gospel. And if you accept the gospel in spirit prison, then you'll be able to still go to heaven, which is also like the theology that backs up things like baptisms for the dead. Because the idea is you need to have that baptism done for you kind of in the physical world, but you'll be able to accept it as a spirit in the afterlife. Like those kinds of things, like, again, like they're nice. Like, I think that's great. It's really comforting to know, or I should say comforting to believe that, it's not all over if you die before getting baptized or whatever.
Now, my third child almost died in her first month, and she got, like, first of all, she was born prematurely, and she had, it wasn't that bad initially. So when she got out of the hospital, she was fine. But then again, a preemie baby with some complications that were not too serious, but still like in a very fragile position.
Yeah.
But then she got RSV 2 weeks later. And she actually stopped breathing. We had to rush her to the hospital, etc. And I did call the priest. I just to let her, I call the priest in the parish that we go to, and I say, hey, just to let you know, my daughter is in the hospital. What do I do? And then he gave me all the instructions. I actually could have baptized her myself if push comes to shove, if there is an emergency. But I don't think I could have. Yes. I don't think that I was doing this because otherwise she's going to hell. I don't think that would be my motivation. It was more something like, hey, like there is, at some level, there's this belief that we're all members of the body of Christ, which is the church, and you want her to be a part of that as well. But it's less about like, if you don't do it, then at least for me, then she's going to suffer in heaven forever, right?
I'm so sorry. Like that.
Yeah.
That sounds awful.
Oh, she's perfectly fine now. But like
oh, good.
Yeah, and she likely got RSV from one of the 2 ones, because like man, kids you will know, they're a petri dish. They spread diseases all over.
This last winter was a disaster.
Yeah.
We were sick just on and off for.
And my daughter was born. She was born in November, so that's exactly part of the problem. Like, so she was born during winter. And my other kid, like the oldest one, we could tell him stay away from the baby, but Emma was 1. She could not stay away from the baby, so she would go hug the baby, kiss the baby with her nose full of boogers. We did try to not let that happen, but it was essentially impossible. So she just got RSV with 2 weeks old.
Yeah, that sounds awful. I don't know what I would do. That's
awesome. So before this gets any darker, I had a blast talking to you as usual. So every time we sit down to
Yeah.
talk, it's always a great conversation. And look,
I think this is a really cool thing you're doing.
thank you.
Have you seen that episode of Silicon? I think it's Silicon Valley, where like the guy is outed as being a Christian, and it's
Yes,
like a
yes,
parody of like
yes,
being coming out of the closet.
yeah.
Like it is true, and I do
Hmm.
wish that that stigma did not exist because, like I said, I think I don't think I have not seen any sort of evidence that shows that if you are a theist, you're a worse engineer. So I think it's cool that you're doing this, and hopefully it gives a lot. Hopefully it at least helps a lot of people feel more comfortable in tech with their beliefs.
Awesome. Lane, it was a pleasure having you. I hope to see you in August in Salt Lake City. And
Yeah,
I am going to React Rally and hoping to see you there. Always a
fantastic.
pleasure,
I don't
man.
do
See
React,
you.
but
Yeah. Show up. Show up. Okay.
cool. All right, talk to you later, Glauber.
All right. See you. Bye bye.